Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Marcus Holmes, and I am the sales engineer here at Zyxel. I want to welcome you to our Tech Talk on firewall security policies, where I will discuss how to set up and configure policies to protect your network. So on the agenda today, we're going to take a look at the ATP series firewall, and we're going to look at the security policies on set up application control, content filtering, anti-malware, reputation filter, intrusion detection and prevention, the sandboxing feature on the ATP, your local email security, SSL inspection, and IP exception. So during the webinar, you can ask questions and I will answer them as we go along. So you are free, so please feel free to ask questions as I continue to go through the webinar itself. So let's go ahead and get started with the ATP. So if you were present at my previous webinar where I discussed the best practices for setting up your ATP, I went over how to make sure that your licenses are up to date, which is very important for you to use with the ATP, because if your licenses are up to date and your signatures are up to date, you will have the most up-to-date information for the device to scan for security. So to begin, we're going to go ahead and start with our application control, which you can find under configuration, security services, and application control. Now, under application control, you can create a new application. And what application control does is it scans the packets coming out of the firewall and looks at the application layer to determine what kind of application is being used. Now, application control is different from content filtering because content filtering will scan on port 80 and port 443. This means that if a user is on a tablet and they're using an application such as Netflix, or if they're using something like Facebook, content filtering will not be able to scan that traffic because it's using randomized ports. Application control will allow you to scan the packet using deep packet inspection to determine what kind of application is being used. So in order to configure your application control, you can come over to Add, and here are your applications that you can query. So you have antivirus, behavioral, games, middleware. You have a lot of different services that you can choose from. If there's a certain service that you need to try to find, what you can do is come into the search section, and if you were to type in Netflix, all lowercase, and hit search, you'll get hits on the different type of applications that can come up for Netflix application. So there's different ones. We have the regular Netflix page, we have the Netflix login, and we have audio and video. So there's different categorizations for Netflix itself if you want to block it. If you want to block all of these, you would simply select them, or you can highlight and click this button here at the top to select all. And then what you can do is hit Add to My Application. Once you've hit Add to My Application, you have a choice. You can choose either to forward or to drop. Forwarding is a good way to allow the traffic to pass through the firewall, but it'll log it. So it basically will detect it and won't do anything with it. It'll just forward the query onwards through the firewall. And this is a great way to set up logging so that you can go back to your customer and let them know what kind of applications are being used on the network. So for instance, you can go back to your application control and select all of the categories and then set it up to set it so that it forwards the traffic and sets it to log. And this works well in conjunction with our SecuReporter software, which is our cloud-based reporting software, because then you can generate a report and let the customer know what type of traffic is being used on the network. And then you can work out a contract with them if you need to be based on MSP rules on how you would like to handle setting up rules to block specific type of traffic. So in this instance, we're going to go ahead and block Netflix for an example. So we can come down here and set it to drop. So you can do this for all of these, or what you can do as well is you can highlight it, hit Shift on your computer, highlight the actual rule, hit Shift on your computer to highlight them all, and then come over to your action, and you can set it to whatever action you'd like. So drop, forward, or reject, and it'll select all of the rules that you've set up. Once you've created your rule, you have a name up here. We can call this, Netflix, and we're going to call it Netflix block. And we come to save and exit. Now, as you create a policy, you'll get a notification that this policy has not been added to the firewall rule. Because with our policies, you create a policy that specifies or defines what you're going to block or allow, and then you have to apply it to a packet direction in the firewall that determines whether it's going to be from a specific LAN or a specific user. So this indicator will come up to let you know that you need to add this to a security policy. So what you want to do is click on yes, and this brings up the security policy. Now, by default, you have LAN 1 to any, which means that anybody on your LAN will be able to be included in this policy if you add it to it. So simply clicking the check mark box here allows you to add that policy to all of your LAN to outgoing traffic. Now, what if you want to do something a little bit more granular? What if there's a specific user or there's a specific IP address that you want to allow around that rule? Let's say that there's a CFO or a CEO that comes to you and says that they do not want to be part of that policy. Well, that's where the granularity of the ATP comes in. You would simply come up to your security policy, which is your firewall rule and policy control. So under here, you'll see that this top rule here is the one that we created, LAN 1 outgoing. And there's a profile that's set to the Netflix block profile. Now, if you want to set a specific user to be exempt from that rule, what you can do is click on add. You can give it a name. So we'll just call this CEO unfiltered. And then we would come down to our source, or from in R2. So we're going to say from LAN 1, if that user is on the LAN 1. We're going to set the 2 to any. The source is where you choose the specific IP address. So what you can do, since this is object-based, is you can come to create a new object, create a new address, and we're going to specify a host. So let's say that we've set up ahead of time MAC binding on the firewall so that specific users always get the same IP address based on their MAC address. So we're going to call this the CEO IP. And we'll say, for instance, his IP address is 192.168.1.50. So now we've created an address object that specifies that CEO's IP address that's local to the firewall, and click on OK. Once we've created that, now we can come down to our source, and we can choose that CEO IP address. And then we leave everything else as default, and we do not apply any policies to it. Now, if we click on OK, that rule is now above the firewall, the rule is above the content filtering, the application control rule that we just created for the Netflix block, because it reads the rules from top to bottom. So when you create a service policy, app control, content filtering, all this good stuff here, you apply your policy to the firewall rule over here, and it reads it from top to bottom. So in this example, whenever the CEO tries to leave out with his IP address, he will be exempt from the rule because he is above the application control rule that we've created for Netflix. So the CEO will be able to get around this because of this rule. Now, some of the things you can do with application control that's going to be very useful is there's options for torrents. So if you type in BitTorrent and type search, you have BitTorrent. So this is going to be very useful in applications where you're installing an ATP at, say, a place that's going to be hosting web services, or a place that's going to be providing free Wi-Fi, so maybe a hotel or any place where there's going to be a hotspot. Because you definitely want to enable blocking of BitTorrent, because you don't want users coming in and using BitTorrent from that location. Because if you do, that customer will then be liable for anything that the customer or anything that a user does using BitTorrent. So you can block BitTorrent with application control. Moving along, we're going to take a look at content filtering. Content filtering is going to be similar to App Patrol, but it blocks on HTTPS and HTTP. This is going to be very similar to any type of services where you see where you get a message if you try to access a specific website. And the way that this works is that when you go to a specific website, the DNS is then queried and it's sent to the content filtering server. The external content filtering server will take a look at that specific address or host and find out what category it belongs to. That category is then sent back to the firewall where it checks the policy that you've created to see if that particular category is allowed or denied. Now, we do have some default ones that are built in to the firewall when you purchase the unit. There's the business productivity protection policy and the children's internet protection policy. However, you don't have to use these, but you can use your own. So starting from the top, we have enable HTTPS domain filter for HTTPS traffic. Enabling this will prevent users from being able to access HTTPS websites based on the policy that you have set up. If you enable the content filtering HTTPS domain filter block warn page, you can set up a specific page that's set up for blocking and warning. And then also we have the option to drop a connection when the HTTPS connection with SSL v3 or previous versions is detected. So in order to set up a policy, you would come to Profile Management and click on Add. Here you can give the profile management a name. So we're going to just call this our own productivity. Now we have a couple options here before we get into the meat and potatoes of it. First, we have Enable Safe Search. Enabling Safe Search is very similar to what you see on your own search engines, basically with Yandu, Yahoo, Bing, Google, all of those. When you enable Safe Search on those particular browsers or within those search engines, what it does is it puts a specific code at the very end of the HTML, or actually it puts it at the very end of the URL. So this particular code that's added to the URL enables the Safe Search on that particular browser. When you enable Safe Search, we end up appending that particular code and putting it in the URL so that even if the customer does not have Safe Search enabled, it'll automatically enable. This is very useful because you don't want to have customers looking up things that go beyond what the content filtering can do. For instance, content filtering cannot filter out images. So if someone were to go to a Google image search and search something very inappropriate, the content filtering will not catch it, because the content filter is going to be working specifically on the domain itself and the category returned by the domain. So once you enable Safe Search, this will actually protect you against using, customers using image searches. Next, if you enable content filtering category service, you have the option to choose to log all of the web pages, which we suggest that you do actually. So starting from the top, you have action for managed pages. Managed pages is going to be the type of pages that actually have a category. So if you go to a page like Facebook, that's going to be a category for social media. Action for unrated pages means that if a page does not have a category, you have the choice of warning, blocking, or allowing it to pass. Simply warning will put up a message that alerts the user that this page is unrated. You can have to choose to click to continue. You have 30 seconds to do so. And then finally, when the category server is unavailable, meaning that when the content filter cannot be reached, you have the choice of either warning the customer, blocking, or passing. Next, we get to choose our categories. So as you can see, we have a variable amount of categories here that you can choose from. So once you've chosen your categories, you can click on OK. However, let's just say that you don't know if the specific website belongs to one category or two. So you can come down here to URL to test. You can go to type in http:// we'll try Reddit. Oh, sorry, my content filter server is not, my services are not available. But right now, basically, if you were to type that in, it basically will return the actual content filter category for that service. Next up, what we can do here is come to custom service. Now, custom service allows you to create a blacklist or a whitelist. So if there's a specific website that you would like to blacklist that is, categorized as something else, or let's just say that you want to block all news groups, but you want to allow a specific website, you can do that in the trusted or forbidden websites. In fact, if you want to, you can actually create a block all, but allow only specific websites. So for instance, you can select all the categories, which will block all of these categories, and then come into your custom service and then create a whitelist for your trusted websites of the websites that you want to allow. So this is very useful because there are some customers that do not want their users to access anything outside of a list of addresses that are useful or that actually pertain to the business that they're doing. So they can block everything and have access to, say, 7 websites that they've deemed to be necessary for work. Now, I have a question that popped up. Is automatic download of external IP domain blacklist supported akin to Pi-hole or PF blocker? At this time, no, we do not have that option. You would have to come into the custom service and actually enter in your trusted or forbidden websites. Next up here, we have a global trusted and forbidden website list. So here are your profiles. When you're in the profile section and you see this trusted custom service here for your trusted websites, these are specific to the actual policy that you create. Then there's a global setting that actually supersedes the policy that you create. So if you put anything in here in the global settings, this will supersede all other profiles that are created. Now, once you've created your policy, let's just say that you created your policy here, is very, very similar to our application control, because you create a policy and now you have to define it in a packet direction or basically your firewall rule. So if you click on this little firewall after you've created it, this will take you to the firewall section. And again, all you have to do is select the packet direction you want to apply it to. So we're going to do LAN 1 to outgoing. And again, since we created that unfiltered rule for the CEO, that CEO is above this rule here. So the CEO will not be a part of the content filtering rule. Okay, moving along to anti-malware. Anti-malware is the ATP's new version of our antivirus. So with the anti-malware, it'll detect both antiviruses and anti-malware using the signature database. Now, what's new in the ATP series is we have something called the express mode and stream mode. So express mode, we utilize 2 different signature databases. We use both Bitdefender and McAfee for our signature databases. So your internal express mode is going to be scanning against a localized signature database, which is provided by Bitdefender. However, you can use the external cloud-based stream mode, which we use McAfee to scan for signatures on traffic that's coming in. Now, what's new to the the ATP series, which is different from the regular UTM series firewalls, is we have hybrid mode, which uses both. So you can use express mode and stream mode, meaning that if it can't find the signature that matches what the file or content is, it will then switch to stream mode, which is the external database. So you have 2 separate databases that it can scan against. So if a file comes in, you have a choice. You can choose to destroy the infected file and then log it. And by destroying it, it'll basically nullify it. So it doesn't automatically prevent the file from completely downloading. The file will download, however, the contents will be destroyed, so it cannot be opened. And then under file compression, you have the choice. So if someone downloads a zip file and it scans it, you have the choice to either destroy the compressed file that cannot be decompressed. However, I would advise caution against this because a compressed file that cannot be decompressed also includes files such as zip files that are password protected. So if they're password protected, it won't be able to actually destroy the compressed file. Up here, we have a blacklist and whitelist. A blacklist and whitelist is useful because if there's a specific file that you know is is safe. Let's just say that you need to get a printer that you're hosting on your own website. However, for some reason, it's coming back as being, it's flagging it as anti-malware. What you can do is come here and add the MD5 hash to the whitelist because you know it's a safe file, and then therefore it'll bypass that particular file. And then up here we have a signature search. So if there's a specific signature or there's a specific malware that's out there, you want to see if you're protected against it, you can actually come here and do a signature search. Moving on to reputation filter. So our reputation filter is somewhat similar to an email DNSVL. So if there is a specific IP address that's out there that has been detected as being a threat, it'll be logged externally in our database for the IP reputation. So that means that if you're going to a website that has been, flagged as being non-reputable, you will no longer be able to go to that website. It basically blocks access to that website. We have in here, you can enable it, you can choose the action to block, and then there's a threat level threshold. So each threat that's out there on the internet in the signature database has a threat level. So if it's a high threat level, there's medium and there's low. So you have the ability to choose which level of the threshold you would like to block or pass if you want to choose to do that. The type of threats that we can protect against are listed here. We suggest that you select them all: anonymous proxies, negative reputation, Tor proxies, denial of service, scanners, web attack, exploits, spam sources, and phishing. Now, we have a blacklist and a whitelist. Now, the reason why we have this in here is because we have seen issues where users on the internet were using a specific IP address to conduct malicious attacks, and then for some reason that site gets shut down, and then the IP later on gets recycled into a legit website. So somebody who ends up purchasing hosting from a company ends up somehow getting that bad reputable IP address. Then all of a sudden their site's being blocked because nobody can get access to it because it's being reported as non-reputable. That's why you would need a whitelist, because you can come and add a specific website to, or a specific IP address to the whitelist. So this is very helpful because you may, with this enabled, with IP reputation enabled, you may run into issues where an IP address is actually reputable, but it was previously flagged as being non-reputable. And then we also do blacklist. So if there's a specific website or IP address that you would like to add, you can put this in the blacklist. We also support external blacklist. So if you have a list, or you know of a list that you would like to provide, you can use an external blacklist to check against. So that can be hosted on a local server behind the ATP or an external server. But if it's hosted somewhere, there's a specific format that you have that we can actually provide to you that you have to set up the file as. There's a specific IP format that you put in the file, and then you would upload it to a server, and then you would basically point to the external blacklist. We also do DNS filtering. So the DNS filtering will work above the IP reputation filtering because it works based on the DNS. So when you send out a DNS request to go to a website, it'll look up the DNS, it'll check the IP address based on the DNS. And then what you'll be able to do in a later version coming out very soon is you'll be able to actually do a redirect. So if it detects a specific DNS or a specific IP reputation, what you can do is then redirect it to a specific website so it never reaches it. And then finally, the URL threat filter, which will now be superseded by the DNS filter, but we do have a URL threat filter which will check the URL and see exactly what its reputation is. We do have a question. Will the DNS filter scan queries other than or from other internal DNS server, or will it or only when using DNS on the router? That's a good question. It's basically going to look at all DNS queries. It's going to look at port 53 traffic. So IDP, there really isn't much for the intrusion detection and prevention to do. There's no application that you need to apply it to. There's no packet direction, any of that. Basically, the way that IDP works is that it looks at the traffic coming in, it scans the packet, and it looks at how the packets are formed. Are they malformed? Are they out of order? And there's specific key features or there's specific key giveaways to how a packet is organized that may flag it as, an intrusion, or it may be trying to flag it as some type of attack. So the IDP signature database will look at, the packet spaces that are coming in, and it'll scan it and check to see if it matches a specific signature, and then it'll automatically just basically block it. So all what you have to do with the IDP is enable the IDP on the firewall. So enabling it, you don't have to add it to anything else. There's a question that came up, does the anti-malware feature need a policy? No, it does not. The only thing that needs policies for basically are going to be your application patrol and your content filtering. Your anti-malware is going to automatically choose, it's going to scan all the traffic coming in and out. So there's no policy that you have to apply it to. There's a question that says, can we exclude internal devices from IDP scans? Yes, I'll actually get to that momentarily. That's part of the IP exception. Let's move on to sandboxing. So on the ATP series, what differs or makes the ATP series stand out above the rest of the UTM series and the Flex models is going to be the sandboxing. So in general, basically what sandboxing does is it guards against zero-day threats. And what I mean by zero-day threats are going to be threats that are out there that are new that don't have a signature associated with it. So if you have signatures on your firewall, it's going to protect you against things that are already known. However, as these threats are, evolving, new threats are coming out, and usually the way that it works is the industry is very reactive. So you have to wait for someone to catch the malware, and then you have to kind of analyze it and try to figure it out, try to figure out how to block it, make a signature based on that threat, and then you create the signature and distribute it. So sandboxing tries to be more proactive about it. So with sandboxing, it goes through the whole steps. Something comes in, it scans, is it malware? So it scans it with the malware database, anti-malware database. Now, if it can't find a signature that matches and the file looks suspicious, what it'll then do is it'll basically destroy the file, but however, it'll also send a copy of the file to the cloud. And in our cloud, we use machine learning to run the file in multiple iterations to determine exactly what it does. So in the cloud, it'll determine if it is a legit file or if it is a malicious file. Now, if it's a malicious file, it'll create a signature, and then that signature is then distributed to both the firewall and other ATP users as well. If it is a legit file, it'll then flag it and allow that file to pass through on next attempt. So if somebody tries to download the file again, they'll be able to. So to do sandboxing, all you need to do is just enable it. You read the terms of service here for enabling it, you acknowledge it, and then you have your options. So you have action for malicious file is to destroy by default. You can log the malicious file, and there's actions for suspicious file, which is destroy and then log. We also have an advanced inspection option, which is to inspect files as they are being downloaded. Now, just a note, when you do this, it will slow down the throughput by a small percentage. So it's not going to be a huge hit, but just know that when you enable this, the download, because it's going to be inspecting as it downloads, it'll actually slow the download down just a little bit. Now, as far as the options for the file submissions, we have zip files, exe, MS Office documents, macromedia flash files, PDFs, and RTFs. Next, under email security, there aren't too many people using this feature anymore because it's a little bit outdated. Most people are using cloud-based email, which this does not scan against. However, If you have your own internal, if you're still using your own internal email server, you would use email security. And what email security does is it uses a DNSBL. So you can put your own DNSBL in to this list. And the DNSBL that you can use for setting this up, you can go to something like DNSBL.info, I believe. You can add the domain list in here. So DNSBL.info will give you a list of different email security domain checkers that'll check emails based on IP address. And you can put in multiple domains in this section. So when an email comes in to your server behind the firewall, it'll scan it. And if it matches a host or IP address that's non-reputable, it'll then change the subject header to either malicious or spam so that your own email server will then have its own rules enacted so that if you see a specific subject header, it'll move it to a specific folder. Now, again, like I said, this is a feature that's not in use very much often anymore, mainly because of the fact that a lot of people have moved over to cloud-based email. SSL inspection. So SSL inspection was something that we added a couple iterations back of the firmware, mainly because what people were doing with content filtering was they were using HTTPS to get around content filtering rules. So SSL inspection allows you to use certificates on the firewall and on each client so that it can encrypt and decrypt traffic on HTTPS before it leaves the firewall. So this means that you can use SSL inspection to inspect traffic before it leaves the firewall. This is also a good way to use SSL inspection to verify the validity of websites if needed be, and you can also use it with content filtering if you want to as well. And then finally, IP exception. This is the question that came up earlier. If you want to exclude a specific IP address or range of IP addresses from certain security policies, you can come over here to the IP exception. So in the IP exception, here are the security policies or the security services that you can, make exempt from. So what you would do is you would type a name, you would set your source. If you don't have a source, the one we did earlier, which was a CEO IP address, and you can choose which services to bypass. So if you have a SIP phone, VoIP phone, whatever it might be, and you need to actually have it bypass it because that phone only communicates with one IP address because it's programmed to only contact one IP address, and you know that that IP address is something that you have complete control over, and you know that it's not going to cause a problem, you can have it bypass all the scanning, excluding the content filtering and the application control, because those you would set up rules in the policy control, the firewall rules. But since these services here do not have any type of firewall rule associated to the packet direction, you can just throw that in here for the IP exception list. And that's basically the security services on how to set them up. I'm basically going to leave it open for questions. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in. And I'm going to go ahead and leave the floor open for all the questions. Oh, I did see a question about the features in Nebula, and I believe that was already answered. So we got a question, what's the performance hit when sandboxing is enabled? We don't have the exact numbers, but it's not going to be a gigantic hit. It's very limited. It's going to be basically on the downloaded file that's coming in, because it has to inspect the packet as it comes in and check every bit as it comes in. So the download is going to be slowed down a little bit, but we don't have the exact numbers on it. A question came in. Is there a specific way you recommend enabling SSL inspection? The best way to do it is to get a signed certificate. So if you would go through a CA authority and get your certificate signed first, and then import the certificate into the firewall. There's a section that you can import your certificates, and then from there, what you would do is then import the same certificates to each device that's going to be on the network. The drawback is going to be that you can't install the certificate on mobile clients. So it's specifically going to be on computer devices on the network. There's a question about any free services. No, actually these, in the ATP, there's only one license. And the license is going to be all of the services combined. So you can actually see that. Let me see if I can bring my screen back up to, so I can show that really quick. Okay, so basically, if you'll see here, this one's out of date, but I can probably bring up this one here. So over here, we'll see that these are all of the services, and they're all under one license. So this is not a free service. This is something that's going to be licensed out. It's going to be the gold security service for the ATP. And you'll see that basically when you get the service, it's all included. So with the ATP, there's no piecemealing your security services. It's going to be an all-in-one. Whereas compared to like our older UTM, the Nebula Flex or the USG Flex, you can buy them piecemeal. You can buy, your application control, content filtering, or you can do your anti-malware separately. But with the ATP, it's an all-in-one bundle. Question came in, where can I find details for the external blacklist? Can you be a little bit more specific? Are you looking for how to set it up, or are you looking for how to get IP addresses for the external blacklist? There's a question that came up, comparing the USG Flex series, what will be the main difference? The main difference right now is going to be that the ATP has the sandboxing and the USG Flex does not have sandboxing. So the hardware is going to be very similar. Right now, the USG Flex series is going to be incorporated into Nebula here soon. So the USG Flex series will have kind of the same hardware as the ATP, but it won't have sandboxing, but it'll be in the cloud. So right now, you kind of have to choose if you want to have, localized full scanning with sandboxing, or if you don't want to do sandboxing, you can use the USG Flex series in the cloud. App Patrol, sometimes we need to drop the entire group, for example, instant messaging. And by default, all is forward. Then we need to change one by one to drop. Any tricks for this? What you can do is, the best way to do it is do it incrementally. So I'll give you an example. Let me see if I can show you here. So for application control, there's instant messaging. You are correct. There is an instant messaging section. There's 79 different instant messaging options. So if you select that, you'll see that all of these are set to instant messaging, right? So if you're looking for a specific one, if there's one that you want to have set to drop or set to forward, what I would suggest that you do is to pick and choose which ones you want to do. So for instance, let's look at all of these. Let's just say that I want to do AIM Express. I want to block all of AIM. I want to block all of Fleet, Chat, eBuddy, so on and so forth. So pick the ones that you want to block first. Then if you hit add to my application, it'll show up in the application section. And what you can do is, left click on that rule, hold shift, and then move your arrow down. And then you can hit the action button and then hit drop. And then what you can do is then go back and get the rest of them and hit them as forward. So that way you don't have to go through it one by one. So you do all of your drops first, then go through the list and then look at all of your forwards, one that you want to allow, and then allow them. There was a question on IP addresses file structure. I didn't catch the first part of that one, so hold on a second. There's a question that just says IP addresses dash file structure, etc. I think that came as part of a different question and it got cut out. So if you can repost the same question again, I'll go ahead and answer it. Can you whitelist or blacklist based on geolocation? At this present moment, no. You can only use the geolocation or the geo-IP filter specifically for firewall rules. So if you can, what you can do is in policy control, if you want to block specific incoming, yes, you can. But when it comes to applications and content filtering, no. Specifically, the geolocation IP filtering is specified specifically for the firewall itself. How to set up rules for VLAN networks. So if your VLAN is being controlled by the firewall, so if we have the VLAN set up on the firewall itself, so for instance, I have a VLAN here at VLAN 30, which is got its own IP address and subnet. So if the firewall itself is the one that's controlling the VLAN and handing out IP addresses on that VLAN, it's as simple as selecting the actual address object. So if I were to go back to content filtering, and we've created this, we'll just say that this children's internet protection policy. If we go to our policy control, and we create a new policy control, what we can do is we'll just say that a good example would be, let's say that you set up the firewall, the ATP, with VLAN 30 having its own IP address, and it's connecting to a switch, which then connects to an AP. And that AP is connected to, say, a children's network. So you have a children's SSID that's specifically for kids. So you have a kid's SSID being broadcast on an access point, and that SSID then ties back to VLAN 30 so that when a user joins that SSID, they're on VLAN 30. So what we can do is we'll just put in, kids policy here, and then we can select the source as VLAN 30 because it's an address object. So that means that anything coming from VLAN 30 will then be part of this particular content filtering. So we have a rule here for content filtering. This is a profile. You can select the profile. We have the children's internet protection policy that's by default, but as you create profiles, they'll be in this drop-down list. So starting here, you can say kids policy, anything coming from VLAN 30 will then get applied with this content filtering policy or application control or SSL inspection. So you have the choice of being able to granularly design your network and your rules based around the address objects that are already created by the VLAN itself. Okay, so it was, where can I find, I think that's what the question was. Let's see, there was, where can I find the details for the external blacklist IP addresses file structure. You can contact our tech support. They can provide that for you. There's no, there isn't a kind of format that's listed in the data sheet or the user guide, I believe. But you can contact our tech support and they will be able to provide it for you. Or if you want, shoot me an email. Let me give you I'll give you my email address at the end of this here. You can shoot me an email. I do have some documentation somewhere on how to set that up. Good question came up. Are any statistics being collected by Zyxel on threats getting through with all? Some and no policy rules being implemented. No rules, 95% of the threats pass through versus 99%. One of the things that once you set up your firewall rule, you can show you in the Advanced Threat Protection tab. So this is the dashboard here. The Advanced Threat Protection tab will show you basically an overview. In fact, I'm going to show you on our demo ATP here that you'll be able to actually see this information. It won't show you things that are passed through, but it will show you, looks like I got kicked out, but basically here is where you would see this information. It gives you kind of like an overview of how many things that were scanned, how many things that were blocked, but it won't give you a number or statistic as to, out of all the things that were scanned, basically what's gone through and what hasn't gone through. This just gives you the number of sandboxing. Let's just say that something came in that needed to be sandboxed. It'll give you a number, an identification of how many were scanned. Okay, and then I'm going to leave the floor open for some more questions. It looks like we have a question about content filtering. So content filtering, if we wish to allow a specific website, do we add as *Zyxel.com or *Zyxel.after? So basically you're talking about wildcards. So if you put *Zyxel.com, that means that anything in the subdomain that comes before it, you're basically allowing it for the whole website. So when you do your blacklist or your whitelist, if you want to do the whole domain, if you want to do everything, even the subdomain. So let's just say that we had sales.zyxel.com or help.zyxel.com. If you put *Zyxel.com, then that will take care of your wildcard, because that's basically what the wildcard designation is. It's going to be your *domain.com. And then we have a question about SSL VPN. How secure is it compared to IPsec? SSL VPN is actually less secure than regular IPsec, just because it's going over 443 and you don't have any control over your encryption algorithms. We always suggest that whenever possible, use IPsec VPN for the best security possible, just mainly because of the fact that you have full control over the encryption algorithms, and then also you have your phase 1 and your phase 2 encryption algorithms, along with a pre-shared key that needs to be known by both ends, along with, in addition to basically having to know both networking schemes of both sides of the tunnel. Whereas SSL VPN, it is only required to know a username and a password to connect. So your IPsec VPN is going to be a lot more secure. Any way to get Bonjour to work over LTTP VPN? At this time, Bonjour tends to not play well with LTTP VPN or VPNs in general sometimes. You usually have to do some type of service forwarding, but usually with LTTP VPN, it's kind of hit or miss with Bonjour. So usually a lot of people, for instance, want to try to print through the VPN using LTTP VPN. However, sometimes it does get lost through the VPN connection as it's encapsulated. We use LTTP IPsec with the pre-shared key, cannot get net BIOS to recognize any hints. Have you guys tried using a Win server so that you can ping by host name? I know that a lot of people try to use the NetBIOS to the VPN, but we suggest to try to use a Win server whenever possible, especially when using the VPN technologies. There's a section in the LTTP to specify a Win server in the LTTP section. Question, are there any plans to implement forward secrecy with SSL VPN? I have not heard of any new plans for that right now, but if they do come up, we will definitely announce it and let you guys know. The question came in, it's not related to this, but basically dual WAN, is there any way to get a VPN to work over both VPN for a backup VPN? Yes, there is. That's going to be something that I might do as another tech talk about VPN setup. It's something that's becoming a little bit more apparent when it comes to setting up VPNs, but yes, there actually is a way to do it. There is a secondary WAN port that you can do. There's a primary and a secondary WAN port for backup, and you have to have it on both sides to be able to use both WANs. But basically what you end up doing is in your VPN policy, when you specify the primary gateway, you would set it to all zeros. And then you have to set up a WAN trunk that specifies both your primary and your secondary WAN, so that when you want to do failover, it'll automatically choose whatever WAN trunk port's enabled using all zeros. That's why you set it to dynamic. But then on the other end of your VPN, you also have to have it set up with a primary and secondary that puts both IP addresses in. So that's something that I can readily more explain when I do a webinar about VPNs in the future, but you can always contact our technical support staff because they do have documentation on how to set that up and they can walk you through it. But long story short, yes, it is possible to do that. Okay, so that should cover it for today. Thank you for joining the webinar. I'm going to be doing a webinar next month on the GUI of the firewall. So if you have any questions about the GUI of the firewall and how to set it up, you can ask me during that next webinar. But I'm going to be doing a deep dive into how to set up specific things on the GUI and basically how to understand how the firewall works, how to configure and set up the firewall to get it to behave and work the way that you want it to. I understand that when you're coming from a third-party vendor, our GUI is a little bit confusing. So I want to do a deep dive in how the GUI works and just get you kind of familiar with how to set up the firewall. So I'll be doing that at my next Tech Talk next month. It's basically, like I said, going to be a security overview of the GUI from top to bottom, just so that you guys can understand how to set up things in the firewall. And with that, if you have any questions, just please email me. My email is on the screen. I'm open to all emails. You can just email me at your leisure, and I will try to get to them as quickly as possible. And I do thank you for joining the webinar, and I will see you next time around. Thank you.